Hey, good afternoon. Bill Gross here, the LAProbate.com. This is our Tuesday afternoon, 3 p.m. real estate investing Zoom.com. Normally, I'm from Los Angeles, California, but today we are live from not just Las Vegas, but Las Vegas Strip. I think you can get a picture of that. Let me see if I can give you guys a little better shot of that. 1 second. Let's see here. Speaker mode. There you, oops, wrong one. Let's pin that. Spotlight for all. There you go. I am at the MGM Grand across the street from the Wynn, from Mirage. I'm at the Mirage. Anyhow, there we are today. Oops. And we'll get back in line. Here at the hotel at the Mirage at the EXP Con, EXP Real Estate Company's annual convention. And we move the spotlight. And let's go back to gallery view. So our technology is a little different today because for a lot of reasons. I don't have a normal setup. The internet is not quite as full-featured as at home. I tried to get the Speedify to work, speed things up, but here we are. But I wanted to make sure we did this today because I have a great guest. He's going to be on in just a minute that I think will really be a benefit to anybody who is investing in real estate in Los Angeles. One of the biggest challenges I see for investing today is tenants. One of the biggest challenges for selling property if you're an investor is who's living in the property and what do you do about it. And increasingly, people who otherwise maybe had hard times financially and might have needed help now are almost making a full-time career out of being difficult tenants and creating what are called zombie properties that nobody owns or the owner doesn't control, can't get sold, causes blight in the neighborhoods, and all kinds of social problems. So today we're going to talk to somebody who helps those landlords in situations. And I know he was racing to get home himself from a Zoom call. So before we start, just real quick, anybody want to share any victories they've had this past week as far as their real estate investing experience? Anybody buy any properties? Anybody getting properties under contract you want to share about some good news with us?
Well, I can add. I talked about a few weeks back that me and my wife bought a single-family home in Columbia, South Carolina, that we initially were going to flip and sell, but it ended up being a wholesale deal out of it. So we sold it, and we're looking at. And the reason we did that was that we found a couple of duplex and fourplex that were available, and we thought, let's do that instead. So we sold it and are looking at the duplex and fourplex in Columbia, South Carolina.
Nice. Well, Columbia is a great market, I know, for rentals because the economy there is strong. Where you have good jobs, you have good tenants, and that's what investors are looking for. So congratulations with that. And I think one of the benefits of actively looking at deals is you'll find some that maybe you don't want to buy. That's what I've done, but I'll wholesale them or I'll broker them to somebody else while I'm waiting to find the deals I'm looking for. So I personally, probably do about 2 properties a year that I flip, and all the rest I'll pretty much either wholesale or broker or bring to investors to deal with. Okay, I don't see James on the call yet. James, if you're there, say hi. Maybe you have your name different than I'm expecting. I don't see that yet. So I'll show you guys, I'm really excited. I'm here at Las Vegas for eXp Realty's national convention. For a company of 60,000 agents internationally, we have about 5,000 here for the convention. It's exciting to be in real life. I'd say that about 10% of the people wear masks all the time. And then they're encouraging us in the meeting rooms to wear masks, unless you're eating or drinking. And it's interesting. I would say some people comply, some people don't comply. It's much more relaxed than I thought it would be. Obviously, if you're concerned about COVID or highly concerned, might not be the right environment for you. If you're concerned to wear a mask, I think people are understanding that. But I will say, just on a personal level, it's really exciting to be back in real life and meet people. I had a chance to see David Hill. He's a guy out of Boston who wholesales and flips, and had me on his podcast last week. It was nice to see him in person. So it's nice to meet people at the end of the day. And I think that sometimes people get in real estate investing thinking it's a way to avoid dealing with people. I'll sit on my computer and I'll go into Facebook groups and find a property, sell a property. I know that happens, and I'm not saying that it can't be done, but I will say is the people I've known who've built wealth in the long run, and the people I've known who've built sustainable businesses, at the end of the day, it's built on relationships. And the relationship can be based on information or education or data, but there has to be a level of trust there and desire to work with somebody that will make you more successful in the long run. So I would just urge you all, if your thinking is the goal is not to meet people, to just deal online, I think you're going to find it wanting. Now, I'll say this, if I'm wrong, feel free to tell me I'm wrong. Share with me your success. And if you're able to do it all on a consistent basis, achieve your goals, congratulations. I'm just saying that for most people that I've seen, that's not been a successful winning formula. This is my experience. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that? Do you see people who are able to completely do business online, or do you see more likely people who need to combine online with personal relationships? Anybody have any input on that? No? Just my imagination on that?
No, I have people who are doing most of their, or I know people who do most of their business online, but they have also started. They have built their network from live interactions. So I haven't heard anyone like starting from scratch. I think there are, and they are successful with that. I haven't heard of any, but the ones that I know about, they started doing live networking. But I agree with you. You can sit behind a Zoom or text or whatever, but you need to meet people, because communication is much more than talking. It's body language and things like that.
Yeah, and I'll just share with you on this call, I recognize you, Anders. I recognize Jack Lapidus, local attorney, Winston Covington. I see you regularly. If any of those guys called me the deal, I would look at it. Or if they email me a deal or text, I drop everything and look at it right away, because I know them, I trust them, I respect them. And that's been earned over time. It's interesting, of the three, I don't know that I've met any of them in person, but certainly on Zoom calls consistently over a couple of years now. Winston, I know a friend of a friend. Jack, I know a client who I referred to him, he's done a really good job on. But I would just say in general, these relationships are built over time, not just right away. And the idea that you can just go online and find a property and then turn around and sell it to somebody, and both are strangers, certainly that happens once in a while. But I would suggest in the long run, you got to find a way to meet people. And so I would recommend a couple options. I go to the LA REIC, LA Real Estate Investment Club. Lloyd Siegel has that once a month. It's on a Thursday night, usually the second Thursday of the month, though in December, it will be the first Thursday of the month on December 2nd. And it's at UCLA, which I hate, being a Trojan. But he got like 250 people there. And if I can meet 100 people in a couple hours, that's a productive time. If I can meet a vendor to help me with my business in a couple hours, that's definitely worth my time to do. It's a free event. So I look for those events where I can meet a lot of people. Here at the convention, to be honest, I'm not really even going to the training sessions. There's some great training, though we video it and I'll get a chance to see it later. But the value for me is the networking. So I'm in the trade room, sitting down, meeting people, having a cup of coffee, going to lunch. My goal is to meet as many people as possible, not just to shake their hand, not just to get their data, but to understand what they're looking for and look for the opportunity that I can either help them or they can help me with my business. And so I'd really urge you, networking, to as much as possible, find people that you can meet, that you can help pull, that you can provide some value for. And then hopefully they'll also be able to reciprocate or create value for you in the back end as well. Speaking of which, James, are you on the call by chance yet? Did I miss you? I know he texted me that he was running late. He was in Uber. For all of us, I don't know if you guys experienced this, but in LA, traffic is back to, like, I would say normal, but wow, traffic is back. My wife and I left LA yesterday at 2 p.m. and it took us 2.5 hours to get to north of Baseline on the 15 freeway going north to Vegas. It was just it was like, I remember traffic always being a rush hour. I'm used to thinking it's COVID now and traffic isn't that bad, but I want to say in some cases it's not, but in many cases it is really, really difficult. Okay, I'd hope to have on here James. I still don't see my guest. I'm not really sure what to do at this point. I had conferred with him and I know he was running late and he's not in the waiting room. Let me just share with you what he's about, and I'll be glad to give you information because he is a trusted vendor that's really helping me save 2 deals. As I mentioned to you, I believe that there's increasing a problem in Southern California in particular of what I call zombie properties, properties where somebody's living there who doesn't have the right to be there. Maybe they're a holdover tenant, or they're a squatter, or they're an ex-girlfriend, ex-wife, ex-family member in a probate, and they don't want to leave. And pre-COVID, it was tough enough. There were attorneys that would do evictions. And I think that people who are worried about losing their credit because it would affect their job prospects or insurance or credit would avoid being evicted. And there's a possibility that they would face penalties and such, an eviction court, civil penalties and such. And there are attorneys that specialize in that work. Occasionally you have a troublemaker who required something more specific. I know, Jack, we referred a case to you that you referred to an attorney for an eviction. But today, COVID, of course, has created some different rules, has created different timelines, and that's difficult enough. But I also want to say to you that there's been additional government regulations that have made it harder. And I want to say there's a general change in attitude that's made it harder. What do I mean by that? I'll give you 2 stories where the laws have changed recently that created squatters where there weren't one. So I had a property that my client bought in probate court as a single-family residence. He knew there was an addition in the back. He didn't really think of it as being an ADU. He just knew it was an addition. And it wasn't rented, it was being used for storage. So he got the stuff out of the back of the property and was putting it onto a Airbnb to get a rent for it. Come to find out, it was an ADU. Come to find out that when you add an ADU, the single family home might become subject to rent stabilization ordinance or rent control. So in this case, my client has found out that the lady in the front of the house, where normally single family residences are not subject to rent control, this lady is, which makes the process, I don't know, about 10 million times more difficult. Makes your rights stronger and the ability to get around more limited. So there's been some changes in the zoning laws that have made what previously was not squatters really into squatters. This lady had been living there as a tenant for a long period of time. But because now she was subject to rent stabilization, she can inflict these laws against the owner of the property and make it almost impossible to get around, though we might have a track on that. Second, so that's the case of the laws changing by our government that have made things, in theory, they want to encourage ADUs, but with the same stroke of the pen, they create a whole new group of people who become tenants subject to rent control. Unintended consequences. I'll give you another example of that. I have a client who was in escrow on a single family home on a large lot zone R2. And there's recently a law passing that such properties could now accommodate 4 units. Bad news is, come to find out, because LER2, single family, if you build on that, those properties, at least one of them, has to be in the low income program in the city of Los Angeles. My client said, I don't want to get involved with Section 8. I just want to buy and flip the house and rent it at market rents, not at Section 8 rents. And so the deal falls out of escrow. So again, sometimes these laws have some unintended consequences that we have to be careful of. The other thing that's changed as a result of COVID is I see an attitude change where it used to be people were somewhat uncomfortable not paying rent, but maybe they had to. And there was a small group of people who just outright were writing the system as a way to not pay rent. That group has grown exponentially. There's now almost an ethic of people who find it okay to stick it to the landlord. And it just seems that the frequency of these kinds of tenants has gone up as the government has been more lenient. You might have thought the government being lenient in helping people out would make people appreciative of taxpayers and encourage them to get on their feet. And it really has created, as I see it, the opposite, that once people get a taste of free rent for 6 months or a year, they're addicted to it. And I've always said it's very hard for people financially to not pay rent for 6 months, to start paying. They get used to that lifestyle. You might have thought they put the money aside in the bank and invest it, maybe buy a house. But it doesn't work that way. People aren't that way. When they get something for free, human nature sometimes is to take it for granted. And as a result of that, we have more of these kinds of situations than we've ever had before. And so I, as a listing agent, have sellers who constantly have properties who need assistance. And so there's vendors, there's attorneys you can turn to. Jack Lapidus being one of them. They can bring these kind of problems to, and he can help you sort through them and either handle it or refer you to a specialist. But I'll just say there's more of these problems growing up every day than there are solutions that attorneys have at their fingertips to solve the problems. James, do we have you on the call by chance? Yeah, I don't see our guest, James. So James is somebody who I met at the LA Real Estate Investment Club as a vendor who supports landlords' rights, supports landlords' activities. And he's a vendor that we've used now in 2 listings. And I would say we're in process of both of them. One we made progress on, the other one we're looking forward to some progress on. And I'll report back to you when we get that one taken care of. But I wanted to introduce him to talk about the issues and explain it to you. But again, I guess at this point he isn't on the call yet, so I'm not really sure what to do. Well, let me ask you this. Who has questions or comments on the subject in particular of problem tenants and problem situations like that?
I do. I have fun stories about problem tenants.
Melissa, not fair. You live in that world. Go ahead. No, I'm sure you do.
This is my world. I'm all about it. You know, I have to tell you that this last 2 months have been nothing but owners and investors coming to me in rent control saying, I need to get this tenant out, or this tenant's crazy, or, you know, or I want only Section 8 or Salvation Army because it's a rough area in LA. And I've actually brought in more doors because they're coming for a solution. And a property manager can help with that. But again, we can't do tenant disputes. You know, they have to go to the police, call that. But we look at the law and we look at what are our action plans? You know, did they say they can't pay rent due to COVID? You know, I mean, there's every excuse in the book that you could possibly think of these days. I mean, I had one tenant call me and tell me, I just heard on the news, I don't have to pay my rent. So, yeah. And I think as a landlord or an investor, or even a mom and pop, you know, that maybe it's just their single family home that they've rented out and they bought a bigger property. It's nothing more than a headache than hearing these horror stories. And I mean, for the life of me, it is a free for all, and it's creating a weird culture in the Los Angeles area where I feel like we talk about it on this call. People are like, no LA, nothing in LA and nothing in rent control, right? So just be careful when you're looking at your investments. I've saved a few investors that were in the process of negotiation, said, oh, I have a tenant is 80 years old, they're in rent control, and I'm going to get them out, and I'm going to go ahead and live in that unit and rent out the front unit. And I'm like, is that what your realtor told you? Because that's really cute. That's not a possibility. So just be realistic about your expectations. Always check the ever-changing laws. Don't necessarily, don't bank necessarily on moratorium ending next year. We're still in this pandemic, and it seems like it's just a cluster cuss at this point. So be careful where you invest and be smart about it. Use your attorneys that know real estate, like Lapidus. He's your champion. Pay that fee to get consults on it. So there's no black magic wand to solve this. I don't know how they're going to do it, but if you guys need assistance, I've always told you I'm here for you guys.
Can I add something?
Please, Jack.
Bill?
Yeah.
So thankfully, I don't do landlord-tenant law. But my in-laws, who are not together, they both separately, they own properties that they rent things out. And so I get to hear about landlord-tenant problems. And I'm not going to say which is which, but one of my in-laws knows every tenant in their building and gives them holiday gifts every holiday and really scrutinizes all the applicants before they let them move in and sign a lease, and is really, really a stickler and probably goes over the top. The other one is much more hands-off, much more lenient, just wants to make sure the place is rented, and the tenants don't really know that in-law. And guess which one has problems with tenants? And guess which one has zero problems through COVID? 100% of the tenants in the complex has paid their rent every month through COVID. Okay, it's a trick question because you know the answer.
Well, yeah, definitely. Go ahead. If you want to tell the answer, I mean, if you want to say it, but I think you need to say it because we need to hear this. We don't want to believe that's what it is. We want to believe it's the tenant, but it's not the tenant. It's really you.
The landlord. The landlord that knows the tenants, and the tenants know them, and they get gifts, and they know their name, and they have a phone number where they can reach out directly to the landlord. Now, that doesn't work for every situation, but if you're mom and pop, then act like a mom and pop landlord, and you'll get treated. In my experience, you will get, and this is over, I've now been involved for 30 years with my in-laws and their properties. They separated when my wife and I were in college, so I've been dealing with these two separate entities. So it's something to think about. Now, there's some situations where you own a piece of property somewhere and you absolutely do not want the tenants to know who you are. And I totally get that. I've represented people like that as well. If that's the case, then you need to get a property manager, and not just a management company. And Melissa, I honestly don't know how big your organization is, but you'll probably agree with me. If you can get a property manager who may be a solo or work for a company, and that manager focuses on that property and becomes the eyes and ears of the landlord, and the people know the property manager, and the property manager at least acts like they have authority to help the tenants will act better towards the management team or whatever. If you have rotating managers, or every time you call, the tenant gets a different person on the phone, or the management company's like, I'm sorry, the landlord set down these rules and there's nothing we can do about it, I'm not even going to call them, you're going to reap what you sow.
I saw an amazing presentation by I think South LA Real Estate Investment Club, Anthony Walker of Buckingham Investments. And I think he's one of the leading investors of multifamily in the South Bay Area. It has been for a long time. Not that old. Amazingly sharp guy. He talked about in their portfolio that they actually outperformed this year than last year because exactly as you talked about, Jack, which was relationships. Now he's big, so they don't have the individual personal relationship with the management, but as an organization, a personal relationship with the tenants. They got the information to the tenants to help them with the COVID assistance that was available. They heavily screen them before they get them in to avoid problems. And so I think the thing that I would caution people is buying into a property. It's harder to do that. You're transitioning. And it's not as easy to transition out a tenant as buyers think it is. But once you're in the property, like anything else in life, you treat people fairly, you're more likely to get a fair response back. So I appreciate you saying that, Jack. And I know that's what Melissa's company does. I know I saw Grant Cardone say the same thing where I was at a presentation he was in Florida, and he picked up his phone and dialed his own management at a big, he buys 200 unit buildings. And he calls their management, pretended he was a tenant with a problem, just to see how they would act on the spot in front of a room full of 2,000 people. And he said he wants to have the highest standards of management so he can afford to get better rents than the competition because they treat people fairly, like any other business, right? Well, thanks for sharing. Any other input on tenant situations or management and what strategies you should use?
Here's what we do. We buy complexes too, usually 85 units and above. We'll do a background check. We have a very thorough lease application. We tell everybody to make sure they fill out every question on their lease application, and if they don't, we shred it. And because that means they're trying to hide something. But then after that lease is completed, we do a background check. It costs $152 per resident. And it's worth every penny because we have a former FBI guy do it, and everything matches up. And then what we do is we'll sit them down and we'll say, hey, man, thanks for being a member of our community. We'd really like you to be a part of it. You might have an issue, you might get sick, and you might get, there might be some reason where you might not be able to pay rent. When that happens, just come tell us and we'll work with you. And by doing it that way, it really builds a community, because when people are in dire straits, they don't want to have, they get thrown out on the street when they lose their job. So that way it's a win-win. We help them when they're down, and then they help us because they're paying our bills basically. Right. So that's the way it works for us. And it's been gratifying, because over the last few years, we've been able to help a lot of people. And then
So-
versa.
Is it Christoph?
Chris,
What area are you investing properties in?
Houston, San Antonio, Texas City, Austin, Jacksonville, and Atlanta. We own them. So we're buying another one in Houston on December 7th.
Wow. And what do you do when and if you have a prop tenant? What does that look like? There must be some out of those hundreds of units.
Say again? What if
When,
what?
when you do have a problem tenant, what's the process look like?
Well, we'll try to work with them, but we have pretty strict rules, and it starts right from the application process.
Right.
We find dumps, and we gotta, the hardest thing is when we buy these properties is turning around hearts and minds, because they've been beat down for so long by their previous landlord, who was usually not doing maintenance, and just terrible places to live.
Right.
So we're kind of like iron butterflies. We were very, very strict rules, but we want to be there when we help them. And then as long as they communicate their problems with us, we're able to work with them. The second they don't, then we put on once the eviction process starts, we don't turn it off.
FYI, I'd be interested in any project upcoming in Florida. I'd be interested in looking at. I'm personally looking to move to Florida, and I'll definitely looking to invest there. So if you get anything else from Jacksonville to South Florida, I'm definitely open to anything in the state personally.
The one thing too, though, is we don't, like Grant, we have a third party do our build management, because it's the quickest way to, I have a full head of white hair and it's falling out fast. So we pay our management team very, very well, and incentivize everybody along the daisy chain. And that works so much better, because then we can focus on the asset management side. We can focus on deal flow and everything else. But and people are always worried, oh my God, they're giving away a piece of the pie. And we're like, no, they're giving us a lot of brain and mental space to really focus on acquiring other assets and really maximizing our returns for our investors, which is my job. So,
Now, in fairness, the best way you manage tenant problems in California is you stay the heck out of California.
That too. It's unfortunate. I'd love to own in my own state, but it's so risky. And I've heard horror stories where people basically live for free almost for a year, and you as the owner, I know a buddy of mine whose person hasn't played in over a year and a half. They can't kick the person out, and the guy calls the building authority on him like every other week.
Right.
So it's so painful.
Right. So that's, again, I think California's a whole different ball game. And I'm not saying that the strategies you are describing don't work in California. In fact, like I said, one of the top property investors I know, Anthony Walker, talks about the same process, intense management, third party, and intense screening upfront, which obviously there's a cost to that, right? If you're gonna throw out incomplete applications, you're gonna need more applicants than somebody else by definition, right? So you're probably throwing out, I guess, half to 2/3 of them before you even start. Compared to
We do, and we shred them. And I got to tell you, at first I was like, oh my gosh, why would you do that? And now I'm like, thank God, because
right.
it's painful to get somebody in. It's even harder to get somebody out.
And here, I think I lost you there.
I was going to add too, that one of the things we modified with our screening services is that not just the last landlord that we check the references from, we go to the landlord before that, because likely the one that's trying to get rid of the tenant, simple process, right, to ask for the one prior, they're going to say, oh, they were great, when we know they were a nightmare. So that's an easy thing that you can add to your repertoire too, that, hey, look at the previous landlord. What are they going to say? Because obviously you're going to say, oh no, they were a nightmare. Don't deal with them. So that's a little trick that you could do, an easy, to sleep at night.
Can I go better? We go 3 back, because what we found also is that sometimes their present landlord might want to get them out and might say, oh, they've been the best thing ever, just so they get out of their apartment. So we go 3 deep.
You know,
Peaches.
in the mortgage business, who would ask for copies of their canceled checks. It's amazing to me how many times people give you a whole story as to why they don't have checks for the rent payment. And I'll give you another quick story, true story. I have a client, we have a nightmare tenant situation. We've negotiated now a solution that's playing hardball with them, some cash compensation, some difficult legal procedure I'm not going to get into. But then my client says, and by the way, we're also going to give her money. I'm going to help her find a place to move to, and I'm going to give her good reference to get into the next place. And I'm thinking, well, I'm not involved in that. It sounds unethical, not illegal, but you need to be careful with that, because I wonder what the implications are. If you give a landlord for the next property false information and they turn out to be a deadbeat, I would think that could come back on you. But you're again, who knows? I've not experienced that, but I wouldn't want to be that person who does that to somebody personally. But my client is, so that they're big boys and they do what they want to do. Okay, so look, Melissa is a great alternative if you have, but she's not going to help you get out the problem tenant. Jack knows the overall situation, but he's not going to help you get out the problem tenant. So you see the pattern here is we have people who are experts in this space, in a sense, or have some expertise in this space, and they're saying, well, how do I get involved with all that? So just know this is an area that is, I would say 2 things. 1, very treacherous. But 2, if you can find a solution, you're going to make a lot of money on a case-by-case basis. And so if you have any solutions in this area, if you have vendors, I have one that I went to bring on today, and he could be here now, and whatever, that's what that is. But if you have a vendor that you think would be helpful in these matters, you want to either bring them on to the group here or share them with me for business, I'd be all ears and love to help with that. Okay, so any other input or questions on problem tenants and what do you do when you have them?
I have a question.
Sure.
First of all, my name is Terry. I'm fairly new to the group.
Hey, Terry.
And my husband are getting into real estate investment, but by default, we have a couple of condos that we rent out because we had condos before we got married. So my question is because I had one tenant that I referred to the next landlord, and I said she was really great because in my mind, she was really great. She always called when there was a problem, an issue. They mostly took care of it. They always paid on time. And so I said she was great. But when I got into the place, she had smoked. It was gross. Yeah, the place just wasn't kept. And, then I regretted it because I didn't have a way to get a hold of that person to let them know that, maybe they weren't so great. So how do you find ways to find out how they are keeping up the place?
Wow.
I can offer support for that. I mean, what we do in our office is you offer frequent assessments. So the tenant at this time can deny with the pandemic that they don't want you to enter for fear of them getting sick, correct? And or you, but what you do is you let them know I want to do periodic assessment, and it's a visual assessment. Sometimes you can even go so far as if they're like, you're concerned about deferred maintenance too, you can say, I'm going to send a handyman to come take a look to see, the smoke detectors are working. So there's kind of ways that you can work around it a little bit. Our team has spent a lot of money on technology to create an application that they have to go through the property and take hundreds of photos. And it's very low cost to our company as well as the owners. So it's fully documenting the front door, the back of the front door. Is there a pot farm in the garage? Is there, 5 different beds in a 2-bedroom home? Then we know that's another red flag. So, there's, it's a frequent assessment. You post the notice that you want to do an assessment, message the tenant, wait 24 hours. They can respond to you and say, no, I don't want you to enter due to COVID, or yes, I'm going to be available at this time. But that's the way that you can ensure that your property is being cared for.
Okay.
I actually used to represent landlords in one of the firms I worked at. And the things that I would hear about that led to whatever the lawsuit was about was shocking to me, in the sense that, lawsuits are expensive, evictions are expensive, tenants not paying is expensive. It's not expensive? Having a plumber come fix the sink, having an electrician come and fix the outlet, painting the hallway every once in a while. Penny wise and pound foolish, what was invented by a landlord. And it's shocking to me to think, they're like, oh, they're only paying this much a month. What do they expect? You know what? It's going to cost you more in the end. And I'd say it's a 1-to-1 ratio of how much, you put into the building, that the tenants care about the building as well.
I agree, Jack.
And to Melissa's point, I'm always shocked as an agent when clients tell me that they've not been inside the property for 5, 10, 20 years. They don't know what's going on, because that's also cheap to go by and walk the property. If you're already on the premises, really every unit you should do an inspection once a year to minimum, document what's going on. It's just, to me, just not the maintenance required to own a property. And you can pay somebody very expensively to go in and take pictures of the property. You want somebody to do it properly and do it nicely, but it's not expensive. It's not a lot of time. But if you do that, you're also showing you care, you're documenting things, you're looking for red flags. Once they go full militant and you're locked out of the property, you can't get in it. They expect you're never going to come in the door. It makes no sense for them ever to let you in to try to sell the property if you're trying to sell it. It just, to me, the one thing that I just don't understand is why you wouldn't require at least an annual inspection on a property. If you own something worth $200,000 or $300,000, why you wouldn't walk in and look at it and at least see that it's being maintained properly, or have your staff member do that? That just, to me, is always one that I scratch my head, and I always feel like, of course, professional managers are going to do that. Maybe when you renew the lease, they'll come out and do that, or find some excuse without telling you it's a formal inspection. But I would think you'd want to have somebody there once a year just to make sure you're not. I had a property where they had like 8 people living in the property. It would have been easy to evict them for cause. But once they file complaints, it's very hard to come back and do that. It can be done, but the jury or a judge will be very sympathetic because they filed before you did about some other issue. Good stuff. Who else has input in this, or do we cover?
We have it in our lease. We're allowed to come in every 3 months to view the property.
That's fantastic.
It's in our lease. So.
Well, and with an 80-unit project, somebody's on the premises, I'm sure, every 90 days anyhow. So it's not a big deal to get in there. When you have a single-family home, of course, it's more difficult. But again, it's also more valuable to get in. So I don't think there's an excuse. Of course, after the fact, it's tough to fix that. But to me, it just seems like a natural.
I think also, to add to Chris's point too, having a rock solid lease is much easier than going into a contract with somebody and trying to change the rules afterwards. Spelling out, any adults over 18 must apply for the residence in order to be able to, get onto the lease. I mean, there's simple things that you can add, and we do use CAR in our office, but our lease is now 21 pages long, spelling out there is no smoking in the property. If you get a pet, it needs to be approved by the owner. If you want to go change the light fixture, it needs to be approved by the owner. So having a rock solid lease is very important, so you don't have to go around and try to change the rules after it's been done. And always remember about parking. We're in LA. Everybody wants parking, right? If you promise a space, be careful. If you're planning on trying to put an ADU in at some point, you have to look at that lease and say, oh, well, we promised them a space. Guess what? I can't modify that ADU the way that I want it because that tenant has to have a space. So just be careful when you're going into it. You should have a rock solid lease when you're moving forward with tenants.
The other thing too is our leases are living documents. They're reviewed every couple of months or so. We look at them to see what we need to add, or we have a list of things to add for next residents that come in. because things change and you might forget. So like everybody, all our team members, we have a board. All right, what would be good on the lease, the upcoming lease? So, because it started, like Melissa said, several pages shorter. Now it's pretty thorough. But it's also there to protect the resident as well. So because we don't want
Re-
slumps. We want-
Regarding leases, I'm sorry, go ahead, finish, Chris.
we just want to make sure everybody, all our residents have a really decent, awesome community vibe. And that takes a lot of constant maintenance, which we're happy to pay for. And we want to know we fix things right away, because then everybody will stay longer. You know what I mean? And everybody will have a more enjoyable resident experience.
Regarding leases, you know, a lot of people, they think, oh, well, there's a lawyer, so he can do law. If, you know, you have a bunch of different doctors for the different needs that you have, you know, for your eyes, for your ears. There are different kinds of lawyers. There are lawyers who all they do is deal with paperwork, called transactional lawyers. That's what a lot of people use for things like leases and contracts. And then there's attorneys who actually go to court and find out what happens when you put a lease in front of a judge. And so if you're going to have a lawyer review your lease periodically, it should be someone who's a litigator who actually litigates these things. And then the other thing a lot of people don't think about when it comes to reviewing contracts is you want to have it reviewed by the people who have to enforce it. For example, if you have a property management company, get input from your property management company as to what they think needs to be changed. What issues have they run into where the tenant says, yeah, but the lease says this. So you know, those are the people whose feet are on the ground who will give you the best ideas for things that need to be updated in your lease.
Very nice. Coming from an attorney who practices that, you know, I referred him a client and he referred them to a specialist in a particular field because it wasn't his area. Having that input, you know, and you know, meeting an expert in that field is valuable for me as a full-time practitioner. So look, those of you who are not professionals and have one or two properties, look at what the professionals do who have larger projects. And you might say, well, it's easier for them to do. They have 80 units, or in Melissa's case, she's a property manager. But it makes no sense to lower your standards because you don't know what you're doing compared to the people who know what they're doing every day. They're doing this because it works. And so I would really urge you, especially if you're in the South Bay, call Melissa. She can help you with property management. And if you're going to taking your asset, putting it in the hands of somebody to rent for a year, you want to make sure you follow all the best procedures and best practices to give you the best possible outcome.
Thank you so much for recommending me, Bill. And also, just to make everybody aware on this call, my company is actually a nationally recognized franchise. So likely there's one in most of United States. And if there's not, I'm sure that somebody would be willing to drive over to Oklahoma from the neighboring state. So again, you know, you have resources, they can adjust it depending on the territory in terms of pricing, but it's transparent to investors to be able to invest nationally, to be able to have one company.
Well, great. Other questions or comments on the topic of problem tenants and how to avoid them? Besides the obvious answer of being careful about investing in California, what other answers might you have?
Well, Bill, you hear me?
Yeah, Anthony Brooks, what's up?
Hey, how you doing? Hey, everybody. I have this question because when you're getting into multi-family properties, you're looking at it as an investment. I'm looking at it. I'm looking at it as long-term. I'm looking at it as what I'm going to get on my return of investment annually. So I'm listening to Melissa and Christopher, and there's a lot that goes into it. I mean, an awful lot, and that's fine. It's just that, you know, Christopher sounds like things are pretty airtight and a well-oiled machine in Houston. So I want to know, how do you maintain, as far as those who are invested, how do you maintain that ROI annually? Because I would think that there's a projected return on investment going into each year based on either the laws for tenant laws, and as far as whatever amendments and changes you have to make with the property and through the law, and also as far as whatever things you may have encountered, changes you may have encountered, as far as some problems you had that were that you didn't have in the past, is even with the screening process. So the question is, how is the return on investment properly projected year in, year out?
So let me answer that, and then I'll ask maybe Chris for some feedback from his side. But if you, a couple episodes ago, I had on here a lender, Gina from Probate Bank, who walked through how they calculate when they lend on a property, how lendable it is. And they'll take the rents minus the expenses, and one of the expenses is a vacancy factor. And different lenders have different rules. Some 3% is probably the low side, more commonly 5% of the rents that they expect. Now, some of the vacancy is just turnover. If you listen close to what Chris is saying, having less turnover will lower your rent expense, vacancy expense. And then there's the no pay tenants. And so what we talked about today is some strategies to limit that by having relationships or a perceived value to the community, and or screening tenants more effectively to limit the no pay. So you really have two different classes of losses of rent. You have turnover, which, somebody moves out, you got to clean the place up, re-rent it, get somebody in, and usually there's a gap period of some sort. You want to minimize that. And the second one is getting in a tenant who has financial problems, whether they're legitimate problems, need help, or they're deadbeats and going to take you a long time. And all of that on average might be 5% of your gross. And now if you're a single practitioner, you need to keep that money in savings when you get rent, not spend it all. If somebody's there for 3 years, theoretically you have 15% of your rent in the bank account in anticipation of this happening sometimes. If you're taking all your money out all the time, you're going to get cut short, and that's where people lose properties. Chris, what's your feedback? How do you analyze vacancy and rent tenant expenses as part of your profit and loss projections?
We'll literally stress test everything in a model, and it's pretty. Mr. Brooks, I forgot your first name. Anthony. You can call me or text me, and we can set up. I can show you our model. We stress test everything to see what the maximum can be and what the worst case scenario can be, and then we build off of there. We build off the worst case scenario. What can our ROI be back to our investors on a way that they'll always make money, even if the GPs don't make money, and we'll make sure we always keep it above that percentage. And it's usually like anywhere from, it depends on, it's different on every property, but it's usually from 70 to 76% full. But the other thing too is the properties we're buying and purchasing, they're broken. There's tons of deferred maintenance. So we might have a lot of empty units, which a lot of people run from. We like that because then we can go in and rehab and get the proper community support and start that rolling. Cause there's a lot of moving parts, and it's hearts and minds that you have to convince, because the present residents have been beaten down so bad by their former owner that they're going to think that we're that same type of person, which we're not. But so we're the complete opposite. So we'll bake in all that. We bake in all our costs. We do our due diligence, and it depends upon how big the apartment complex is. It could take us a day, maybe 2 to 4 days, depending on how many units it is. But then we'll go in there with a full notion of our actual costs, and then we'll get actual bids to make sure those rehab things are taken right away. We start with the exterior and work our way into the units that we can. So it's a pretty big formula, but I can bake it down to you on this is like, you got to get your baseline first. What are you going to do to keep your lights on for the business? What are you going to have to do to keep paying your investors if you have investors? And then how are you going to make money on top of that? So you can make money, your investors can make money. That's pretty basic, but I can walk you through very specifically our model and show you how we do it. That's another thing. Our model, the formulas never change. Either the deal works for us or it doesn't. And the other thing too, it's a living document. We will constantly look to evaluate, okay, how can we get better? So.
Okay, thanks.
Well-
I appreciate it, Chris. Hey, Bill, could you do me a favor? If I could get in touch with you later and get Christopher's information. Right now I can't because I'm enjoying the life on 101 in Sherman Oaks.
Oh, how exciting. So, Chris, I don't know if you have access to the chat box. You want to share your information with him privately or the group. You're welcome to. And sounds like he's maybe a prospect for you.
I'll put it in there right now. So for everybody, and if anybody has calls, I don't know everything, but I'm constantly learning. I do know a lot more than the average Joe, and I got great partners and great lawyers and accountants where if I don't know something, I could ask. So
Great. Okay. Well, good. Thank you. Other questions, comments, challenges? We're coming up on the hour here, so we got to wrap up a little bit. Again, Chris, thanks for stepping in and helping out here a little bit. I'm sorry that our guest James wasn't able to get on today, but I think we had a lively discussion on problem tenants. I think the first solution for most people is stay out of California. But if you're in California as an investor, you want to follow those best practices we talked about today. You want to look for experts to help you, both to avoid problems. Jack Lapidus is a great attorney. Melissa Yaloa and property management down in the South Bay and nationally would be a great preventive situation. And then if you get into problems, call me. Maybe I can help you or connect you with somebody that I work with on solving some of these problems down the road. I'm Bill Gross. We do this every Tuesday, 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. It's realestateinvestingzoom.com if you want to register for future, and we'll invite you to come back. We also stream this live and post it on YouTube as well. So thank you very much, everybody, being on the call today. I appreciate you, and have a fantastic week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
See you
Bill.
next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bill, thank you, everybody.